Shalom, it's Rabbi David Barron with my weekly Torah talk. Before I begin, all of us send out our heartfelt condolences and our wishes of comfort to the families who were so impacted by the brutal murder of their loved ones in Buffalo, New York, and also in Laguna, California. When we look at crimes like this that are committed against innocent men, women, and children, and the impact it has on so many lives, we recognize that we as a community have to come together and offer our hearts and our prayers and our support to those families. That's an imperative for each and every one of us. And I know that at a time like this, many of us feel that we are personally impacted by the trauma of these events. And we ask ourselves, what can we do? And we have to recognize that this is part of a tragic indoctrination of young people to hate at an early age, and maybe at a later age in teenage years. But the fact that people are taught this kind of hatred is something that we have to focus on. And we also have to focus on the issue of mental illness. You know, the shooter in Buffalo had published a manifesto, had actually been arrested in his school. And where were the warning signs, the red flags that should have gone up immediately? The FBI, which does such a good job investigating and harassing, in some cases, people, where were they to harass this young man, to make him wear an ankle bracelet, to make sure that he didn't have one single weapon, much less powerful weapons? I think all of us recognize that we have, as citizens, a moral obligation and responsibility to demand of our government more attentiveness to this issue of mental illness, especially when it's manifested and there are warning signs. And we have to also do our utmost to combat this teaching of hatred with the teaching of love, with the teaching of understanding and compassion. That's the only way we'll come through this time. As I think about these events, all of us think about these events, we recognize that we have a role to play here, not just as people who offer comfort and solace to the bereaved families, but also as citizens who want to demand that acts like this not occur again, and that they be minimized, if not eliminated completely. That's our duty and responsibility as people of faith, and we want them to know that people in other faith communities are sharing their grief with them at this time. I'd like to also talk a little bit about the Torah portion, but before I do, I want to mention something that happened last week. We had at our lecture series a young woman, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Malala, and she spoke about the events that impacted her life and that created an international, global movement. All she wanted was an education for girls and for women in her native country, in Pakistan. And for this, the Taliban attempted to execute her. They shot her in the head, and she had grievous injuries, which took over a year and a half to recover from. Thankfully, she did recover and has become a spokeswoman for the rights of women to receive and girls to receive an education. Something so basic, but in some parts of the world where hatred is taught and where the Taliban rule, as you know, many of them have now reimposed in Afghanistan, the wearing of the full burqa and the elimination of education for girls and women. In many parts of the world, this hatred is taught and indoctrinated at an early age. We need look no further as Jews than our own state of Israel, our beloved state of Israel, our ancestral homeland, where so many violent attacks by Palestinian extremists, knifing and stabbing to death men, women, and children. We see this kind of depravity, and we say to ourselves, how can we allow hatred to be taught from such a young and tender age, taking away innocence and purity from children? So all of us have a role to play here, and just as they rallied around Malala, and we will rally around our brothers and sisters in Israel, we have to rally around that community in Buffalo and in Laguna, that community as well, where innocent people were attacked so viciously. All of us have that role to play. The Torah portion this week is the portion of Bahar, which means at the foot of the mountain. The Israelites stood ready to receive the message of the Torah. which was the mission of the Jewish people to bring the light of the Torah and its teachings to humanity. What were those teachings? How to get along in this world, demanding that we live up to a moral code where murder and lying is unacceptable. And when we live by that code, that great gift that we as a Jewish people have given to all of humanity, we inspire others to live by it as well. I hope we can take that message to heart on this Shabbat, and that it lifts us, lifts our spirits and those around us. Shabbat Shalom.